What's up guys, Asian here again with another PTS video, and again this is the off-cycle PTS, so we're testing out the new light attack and heavy attack changes and giving feedback to Zos in the form of this video as well as feedback on the official forums and also through /feedback as well. So yesterday we took a look at mag decays and kind of how light attack builds stacked up to heavy attack builds in this new meta. This video is focusing in more on the magsorc, mainly because a lot of heavy attack builds focus around the magsorc. Magsorcs, typically speaking, are what most people think of when we think heavy attack build on a magic DPS. So we're kind of focusing in on the magic sorcerer today, and we're going to be taking a look at heavy attack builds specifically. So we're not really comparing them to light attack builds anymore in this video. We're just taking a look at heavy attack builds and just commenting on how these changes have impacted heavy attack builds in general. So for this particular video, I have basically three setups. Two setups that I sort of put together on the fly, and then one setup that is fairly popular among more casual players in the game. So here we go, let's get started here. So again, just like the previous video, we're taking a look at two things: sustain and damage. Now the big thing with heavy attack builds, the big drawing point of heavy attack builds right now is not necessarily their damage component, it's more the fact that you more or less have infinite sustain. Because right now in the live server, you get resources back whenever you finish a fully charged heavy attack. So something like a magsorc heavy attack build, you can essentially have infinite magicka because your main spamble is going to be the heavy attack. So you don't have to worry about running out of magic at all, you don't have to worry about sustain. Your DPS is not going to be as high as a light attack build, that is the trade-off of running a heavy attack build, but you're in return for the sustain and just the fact that some people are physically incapable of doing a light attack build. Heavy attack builds definitely kind of fit this sort of niche where either I can't do a light attack build, I don't have the time, or I don't want to invest the effort into learning a light attack rotation, or I am concerned about sustain. That's kind of where the heavy attack build currently fits in. With the new changes, they're removing the resource return from heavy attacks, so you can't really rely on heavy attack builds for sustain anymore, but they did amp up the damage now. Now, not heavy attack builds in general are not just pure heavy attacks. Most heavy attack builds will recommend light weaving between dots. The general format of a heavy attack build is you have a couple of dots, then you have your heavy attack as your spammable. And a lot of build creators do recommend light attacking between your dots. So it's not like you're not using light attacks at all, but there are definitely far fewer light attacks in a heavy attack build compared to a more meta light attack build itself. So the drop in sustain from your heavy attacks, along with fewer light attacks, which are now the new resource sustain, does mean that certain heavy attack builds might have a more difficult time sustaining their full rotation. So let's go ahead and examine these different types of builds. So again, I have two builds that I made myself just sort of on the fly, and then I have one very popular build that I also want to take a look at, just because it is so popular among more casual players. So this is the first of the builds that I kind of threw together really quickly for a heavy attack build. This is using more meta sets here, so we're running New Moon, we have two pieces on it, and we're running Sororia. So this is definitely not something that you would necessarily see a casual player pick up. Perhaps instead of perfect Sororia, you have normal Sororia, you'd only lose a little bit of DPS that way, but generally speaking, this is a little bit more high-end. New Moon is a crafted set, and again, perfect Sororia is not something that a lot of casual players will be able to get. Maybe they'll be able to get non-perfect Sororia, which is only a little bit weaker, but generally speaking, this is not something you will typically see a endgame player really run, or even a casual player. This is something more along the lines of a mid-level player that wants to stick with the heavy attack build and has the capability of getting the higher end sets. So here we pulled just over 70k or so, and this is just raw heavy attacks as our spammable here. In terms of our bars, we have Daedric Prey, Boundless Storm, Tormentor, Inner Light, Bound Aegis on the front bar. Back bar we had Mystic Orbs, Unstable Wall, Barb Trap, Bound Aegis, and Tormentor again. So this is the general setup that I threw together really quickly, and we pulled just over 70k. So not that bad in terms of DPS. If you guys remember from the Mag DK video, that's about similar to what our Mag DK heavy build, attack build setup managed to pull. And in terms of sustain, not that bad here in terms of overall sustain. We never really dropped too far below 75% magicka, so we are doing pretty well for sustain here, despite the fact that we're not getting resources back from our heavy attacks. I suspect that part of that is because we have a little bit better base regen. We have minor magicka steel, and we aren't using that expensive dots to kind of run here. We have Unstable Wall is the main one, along with Mystic Orb, but they're not really super expensive. It's not like you can't make up that magicka back just through natural regen. And I will note here that I am running just pure max magicka food, so I'm not running anything like Glassy Eyeball. I wanted to see in, if I were just running just blue food or just max magicka food, what kind of sustain I'd be seeing on a trial dummy. The next build here, far worse sustain. So this is the very popular Easy Sorc build that uses Undaunted Infiltrator along with Infallible Aether with Zahn. So this is pretty much pulled right off of the website. And we pulled here just under 67k. So still not terrible, but the main issue here is the sustain, and part of it is because Daedric Tomb is so expensive. You can see here just how much drain we're getting from Daedric Tomb here. We are still light weaving between our dots here, so we are getting some light attack restoration here. You can see 251, which is much better than the build that I threw together, which was 120 plus 81, so about 200 or so. So we are getting more sustain out of our light attacks, but Daedric Tomb is just significantly more expensive than the other abilities that we're using on that other build that I kind of threw together here. So this is with Mage's Wrath, and I also did one where I just kept on using Daedric Tomb execute here, but the main issue here is the sustain. So this particular build is going to have issues with sustain here. You did see we are dropping down to 0, we almost dropped to 0 twice here, and we had to basically spam light attacks in order to get our magicka back. That's probably why our light attack restore is a little bit higher here compared to on the build that I threw together. A little bit more drastic here, where we dropped very low 3 times here, and again we had to spam light attacks in order to get our magicka resources back to an appropriate level where I felt comfortable enough to heavy attack and run Daedric Tomb. For this particular build, while it's not necessarily dead in the water, the changes to how heavy attacks work with this current patch does make it a little bit more difficult to sustain, which might draw people away from this build. This build will need some sort of restructuring if the goal is to maintain that high sustain while still maintaining damage as well. So when I just use Daedric Tomb and just raw execute, 67.4k, so around 67k or so here with this particular setup. This next setup is another build that I kind of threw together really quickly. This one's a little bit different. So this one was New Moon and False God instead. False God is a little bit easier to obtain compared to Sororia, mainly because you can just clear Veteran Sunspire, no need to do any sort of hard modes here. But the bars are pretty much the same as the Sororia setup here. This was just to kind of see what happens if I take out Sororia, because Sororia does give you quite a bit of spell damage, and it is a little bit more difficult to obtain for kind of mid-level players, where heavy attack builds are kind of geared towards. They're more advertised towards mid-tier level players, whereas Perfect False God is a little bit more obtainable for mid-tier players. So here we've still pulled around 67k or so, and our sustain pretty decent. And part of it is because False God does give us a bit of cost reduction, so our sustain is a little bit better this way because we don't have as much drain here. Our resource return 113 and 26, so not quite as much. We're only hitting just under 140 in terms of regen, but that doesn't seem to impact us at all because our consumption is also lower because we're running False God. So that does offset the increase in cost that we're seeing from New Moon Acolyte here, so our sustain is not terrible. So basically, more or less, the moral of the story is heavy attack builds, some of them are going to need to see a shift in the sets they're running or the abilities that they are running. Again, this Easy Sorc build with Daedric Tomb being so expensive, you can see here that the Daedric Tomb spam, 716 from drain, just from Daedric Tomb alone. Compare that to our perfected False God version here with New Moon Acolyte, that is almost 3 times as much drain as our highest drain ability here with the False God. So a heavy attack build that runs Daedric Tomb on a magsorc, for example, you're going to need to figure out how you're going to sustain. Whether that means you're going to take one of your bar rotations and just spam light attacks to gain magicka back. That's something that you might want to consider. Of course, that doesn't mean you're going to be losing damage because light attacks have been nerfed by a significant amount. So not all heavy attack builds are going to basically survive this. So the heavy attack builds that I threw together really quickly, they're probably going to be okay. They definitely got buffed because of the buff to heavy attack. They're not going to do as well as light attack builds as I showed in the Mag Decay video yesterday, but they're in a better place than they have been. The gap is kind of closed a little bit between a light attack build and a heavy attack build here, without that much changes. But a build like the Easy Sorc with the high cost of the Edric Tomb, you're going to need to figure out some way of making up that sustain, whether that's through light attack spamming for part of your rotation, or changing your enchants perhaps, or changing up your sets. You're going to have to do something if your goal is to have an infinite sustain forward if these changes go live as is. But that pretty much concludes this video. So moral of the story is, if you're running a heavy attack build, keep an eye out for any sort of changes that might be happening with the Greymoor PTS. If they decide to go through these changes, you might need to change up how your build is constructed. So a good example of this would be the Easy Sorc build here with the Adric Tomb. Probably going to need to go through a couple of iterations, a couple of changes, if the goal is to maintain that high level of sustain. The heavy attack build that I put together, though, that one will probably be able to weather the storm pretty decently well if the changes end through. But that's it for this video. Hopefully you guys found this informative. Let me know down in the comment section below if you guys have been testing out any other heavy attack builds, whether that's on a Sorc or any other sort of DPS spec. I'm interested in knowing kind of what other people's results have been on the PTS. I am kind of busy right now between research, and even though I am on spring break, plus all of the kind of dissertation stuff, I haven't really been able to test everything as much as I would like. So I am kind of depending a little bit on you guys and other endgame players to kind of get a sense of how these changes are playing out on the PTS. Again, hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.